The sun had already slipped low when she came, and I remember it as if the sky itself had been painted for her trial. Dusk settled over the town like ash shaken from a dying fire, lanterns throwing gold onto warped boards and dust that curled under restless boots. The saloon doors swung wide, and in stepped Clara May Whitfield, her figure thin, her belly round with the child of a husband gone to the grave too soon. Folks turned as though a draft had crept in. You could hear the shift of whispers ripple across the room, low and sharp. That's Whitfield's widow. Nothing left but her womb. Their words clung to her like burrs, stinging even those of us who only listened. She stood quietly for a moment, letting the laughter and card shuffling wash past. Her dress was worn thin, the hem ragged, bonnet tilted from the day's wind. And though her eyes were tired, there was still a steadiness in them, the kind you see in women who have already walked through fire. She came not for spectacle, not for drink, but simply for a chair, for a bowl of food, perhaps, something to still the hunger that had been following her like a shadow. Yet in that room, need was taken for weakness, and weakness was prey. Elias Boone leaned against the bar, the saloon's master, with his red waistcoat, shining in lamplight. He saw her and smiled the way a wolf shows teeth. "No coins, no seat," he said loud enough for every ear. "You think pity's worth a whiskey, widow?" A few men chuckled, the kind who lived on scraps of another man's cruelty. Clara did not answer. Her hand rested on her stomach, the smallest gesture of shield. That silence, more than words, made him push harder. He circled her with his eyes, drinking in the image of poverty until the taste of it pleased him. Still she did not leave. Not yet. And something in her refusal burned his pride raw. Perhaps it was the drink, perhaps his nature, but his hand moved quick and sudden across her cheek. The sound cracked through the room sharper than a pistol. For a breath everything stilled, the piano keys held mid-song, a man's laugh died in his throat. Some looked away, some smirked approval, but no one stepped forward. Clara did not stumble. She stood with the bruise rising fast, her lips pressed tight. The only motion was the tightening of her fingers across her belly, as though the child within was the true one she meant to protect. Without a word, she turned and walked back through those doors, out into the cooling dusk. Outside, whispers were already forming, carried quick as wildfire. "She's broke, she's finished, poor fool thinks pride feeds a child." Shame weighed heavier than Boone's slap, for the town's judgment lingers long after the sting fades. In the shadows of the boardwalk, Samson McGraw watched her go. His hands curled into fists, but he kept them hidden in his coat. He knew what few did, that her story was not yet told, that land and inheritance bore her name. But this was not the hour to reveal it. Later, in the dim light of her rented room, Clara lowered herself into a chair by the window. She touched the mark on her cheek, the fire in her skin cooling to a dull ache. And yet, in that silence, she did not collapse. She bent over her swelling middle and whispered, soft as prayer, "We are not broken. They will see." She set pen to paper, her words moving slow but certain, a letter to Samson reminding him of the plan they had spoken of in secret. The time would come to reveal the truth. The lantern on her table flickered, its glow bending with the draft that slipped under the door. Outside, the town carried on with its laughter and cruelty, unaware of the storm that brewed beneath the calm of a widow's quiet resolve. She pressed her palm once more to her cheek, then to her stomach, and with a breath steadier than any she had drawn all day, Clara May Whitfield prepared herself. She had endured their scorn, their slap, their whispers. Tomorrow would bring something else. And for the first time that evening, a flame of resilience lit behind her eyes, burning brighter than the bruise. Morning came with a sky brushed in pale gold, the kind of light that made the prairie shimmer as though heaven had scattered coins across the grass. It was into that light Clara May Whitfield rode, slow and steady, her posture upright despite the weight of child and memory. Beside her trailed Samson McGraw, silent as stone, the kind of man who knew when words would only crowd the air. The town ahead stirred awake, unaware that this was the morning the earth would tilt in her favor, that the soil itself would remember her name. The saloon stood loud with boasting and smoke. Elias Boone, proud as ever, presided over a card game, laughter spilling like cheap whiskey from his mouth. He had already forgotten the bruise he'd left on Clara's cheek. That was his way, cruelty tossed aside, as if it had no consequence. His sister Hazel sat by the window, sewing in silence, her sharp eyes catching more than she ever let slip. It was Hazel who noticed Clara first when the widow stepped through the doors once again, her head unbowed, her steps measured like a woman who had rehearsed this walk in her heart 100 times. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some smirked, expecting another humiliation. Others leaned forward, curious. Clara's bruise was faint now, but visible still, a shadow of last night's shame. And yet it seemed not to belong to her anymore, but to everyone watching, as though their silence had branded them, too. Samson entered behind her, carrying a satchel of papers. His voice rang firm as he laid them on the bar. By order of law, and deed filed under John Whitfield, this land, his hand swept across the room, falls to his widow, Clara May Whitfield. The saloon you sit in, the ground beneath your boots, belongs to her. Gasps cut through the smoke like wind through dry grass. Chairs scraped, whispers swarmed. Elias's grin faltered, his hand frozen on the edge of his cards. For a man built on bluster, silence was the cruelest weight. He stammered, searched for denial, but the ink on those papers burned with truth he could not wash away. Clara stepped forward then, her eyes level with his. She did not shout. She did not sneer. Her words carried calm steel. You struck the hand that could take this roof from over your head. The room leaned in closer, every ear drinking the quiet thunder of her voice. Elias's face burned red, shame heavy as chains, his pride collapsing inward. Hazel, from her corner, lowered her sewing and gave the faintest nod, a mark of respect not freely given. Clara might have ended him then, could have driven him out into the dust. But her strength was not the kind that crushed, it was the kind that endured. She looked at Elias, trembling now in his own kingdom, and spoke plain. You may stay, but you will pay rent fair and due. Or you may leave. The choice is yours. Her grace struck deeper than vengeance ever could. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the rasp of Elias's pen as he signed the papers Samson set before him. Each stroke of ink carved away his arrogance, until what remained was a man forced to bow beneath the widow he had mocked. The crowd, once so quick to laugh, now whispered differently. Admiration, awe, even shame for their own part in her humiliation. Clara turned then, not to save her triumph, but to walk out with the quiet dignity she had carried in. Samson was there, steady as a fence post, his eyes meeting hers. No words passed between them, yet something stronger did, respect and the beginning of a bond born not of rescue, but of equal strength. His hand brushed hers as she stepped down from a saloon porch, a gesture small but filled with promise. The light caught her face, lantern glow from within spilling out into morning sun. The bruise no longer seemed a mark of weakness, but of fire endured, proof of what she had risen above. Around her the town shifted, tongues that once wagged with scorn now held her name like a hymn. And so it was that day, Clara May Whitfield ceased to be the broke widow whispered about in pity. She became the woman who carried her dignity like a torch into the dark, and the flame was bright enough to burn shame from every corner of that town. I tell you this not as gossip, nor as tale for idle ears, but as memory etched deep. For in every heart comes a day when silence must become strength, when hands that tremble must steady and lift. That day Clara May showed us all. And I wonder, friend, when your time comes, will you carry your dignity the way she carried hers? Quietly, fiercely, like a lantern that refuses to go out.